Hello, from the studios of ESAT in Washington, D.C., this is Insight. Today on Insight, Lawrence Freeman, a political economic analyst for Africa. Our topic, an American comes to Addis. As you all know, the Western governments, including the United States, have been advocating for the evacuation of expatriates from Addis Ababa. At this critical time, Mr. Freeman traveled from the United States to Addis Ababa to show his support for the Ethiopian people. Today, we will be discussing his visit to Addis from Addis Ababa, and then we will also talk about how we can finish this war and create a democratic, prosperous Ethiopia. Mr. Freeman, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
I am glad you are in Addis. I wish I was in Addis. So let me begin with what's the environment like in Addis? What is the life like in Addis?
Well, as you know probably as well as I, Addis is Addis. People are walking the streets, people are sitting, sipping their coffee. We have the normal traffic jams on the main street. People go to the bars at night, and life goes on, and people carry out their business, go to work, and enjoy themselves.
Mm-hmm. So, as you know, you have read the media reports, particularly Western media, particularly BBC and CNN. Even my favorite, New York Times, they have been reporting gloom. It's like the invading force of TPLF is at the outskirts of Addis Ababa, but that is not true. So, should we take that as President Trump called fake news, or is there an ulterior motive for such propaganda?
Well, there is an ulterior motive, because what I saw as I was reading over the last several weeks, and I've been involved in this, giving my thoughts on this war for the last year, is what you're experiencing is psychological warfare. That is, the media is not misinforming, the media is disinforming. That is, they're reporting false information, which they know to be false, for a purpose, to basically play with the minds of the Ethiopians, to try to weaken their morale, to try to weaken their resolve to continue to fight. And this is what the purpose of these statements, because they're not an innocent mistake. Anybody could go outside their home and walk on the streets of Addis Ababa and see life is normal, there's no panic, people are not running to jump on a plane. This is not Kabul, Afghanistan. This is a vibrant, big, healthy city in Africa, in East Africa. And the media's campaign is to intimidate and grow fear in people's minds. And I thought, given my knowledge of Africa and Ethiopia, the best place for me to be in the world right now was to be in Addis Ababa, countering this psychological warfare campaign. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I want to express my gratitude. I think I speak for Ethiopians back home and for Ethiopian Americans here in America, that your friendship, your commitment to Ethiopia, we greatly appreciate it. But to go back to the issue, there are many Ethiopians who see ulterior motives. But there are equally a lot of Ethiopians, I would argue most of the policymakers and educated class, that believe that the problem is not that there are the American government or Western governments or Western media hate Ethiopia, but they are misinformed. The last 30 years, the narrative that have been inculcated in the Western mind is that of the TPLF. So this is not really intention. It's not a question of intentions, but a question of information. So it is better for Ethiopians to rebuild bridges between the Ethiopian government and the American government, the Ethiopian people and the American people, as opposed to go on a conspiracy theory. How would you respond to that?
Well, you have to understand, first of all, the actions being taken by some people in the Biden administration do not represent America. They don't represent the true interest of America. They don't represent my interest. The knowledge of Africa and Ethiopia among the American citizens is very limited. And the knowledge of Africa and Ethiopia among our elected officials is not much better. People know about Africa from the media, from the headlines of your favorite paper, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and they have no independent basis of determining what's truthful or not. If a media repeats the line over and over again, that becomes the basis for groupthink in the American population. And as I said, there is no reason for Ethiopia and the United States not to continue to work together. I know from travels outside of Ethiopia, many Africans really look to the United States, and they see the United States in its best example of its founding principles, even despite what the United States does. However, we do have a group of political people who are part of the U.S. government, not the total government, and they have plans to destabilize this current government and do not want to continue supporting this elected government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And they're doing that for their own political reasons. And therefore, there is a conspiracy of sorts. And in fact, if you probably were aware of it, there was a secret Zoom conference call with the leader of the PDLF, the former ambassador to the United States, and several American retired ambassadors, European ambassadors, and a former American official actually openly in the Zoom meeting collaborating with the TPLF of how to ensure a TPLF victory and how to remove Abiy Ahmed from office. And there are various scenarios and articles that I've covered on my website that are suggesting ways for the Prime Minister to be removed. And this is an ongoing problem. And if we don't address it and address the motives for it, then we're not doing our job.
Aware of the discussion. I did watch the 2-hour cabal, if you will. However, as wrong as they are, as you said, all of them were retired ambassadors, and they do not represent the current policy makers of the United States. I also had the privilege, really the privilege of interviewing Ambassador Feltman, and I don't know if you watched it, and Ambassador Feltman was very complimentary to the Prime Minister, and also very adamant that the United States and the current administration supports Ethiopia. So my question is, I agree with you. There are components. I think we can name names. Susan Rice, who has been a close associate of Meles Zenawi. Gail Smith, who fought with the TPLF in the trenches of TPLF, and who was the chair or the leader of the REST, Relief Society of Tigray. However, these are not the policy makers of the current administration. From the interview, did you sense a new direction in terms of the U.S. policy towards Ethiopia and TPLF?
I watched the interview. I don't have any previous knowledge of Ambassador Feltman until he became the special envoy. And clearly, in his interview, he was suggesting support for the Prime Minister. However, you have in the State Department statements that have been made that are contrary to what Ambassador Feltman was saying. He said in your discussion with him that there is no tilt towards the TPLF by the U.S. government. Well, that's not true. The U.S. government has made outrageous statements from the State Department spokesman Ned Price and also from the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, referring to genocide in Tigray, which has been unproven, to ethnic cleansing. They have made statements comparing the situation in Ethiopia and Addis to the situation in Afghanistan. It was the State Department that said, we will not be doing any airlifts like we did in Afghanistan. That's the State Department. That's who Feltman works with. So there are people in the department, and you left out in your discussion of individuals, Samantha Power, that don't have the same view that Feltman does. And therefore, what he was was saying he may believe, but it was not true. The United States has issued sanctions against Eritreans and Ethiopians. The United States is threatening to carry out a removal from AGOA, which hurts Ethiopia and the state of Ethiopia, the country of Ethiopia. None of these things hurt the TPLF. And I read yesterday that the government is going to bring up to the UN an arms embargo from arms being shipped to the Ethiopian government, which the Ethiopian government has a right to have to defeat a group that's trying to overthrow the government. And the United States has tilted by creating an equivalence between an insurrectionist group that is identified as a terrorist group in Ethiopia and the Ethiopian government. They're not equivalent. One represents the nation of Ethiopia. The other represents an element that's trying to overthrow the government. So even though Feldman said those things to you, not all of them are accurate.
Sounding an apologist for the State Department, I would argue the State Department has gradually improved or changed or updated its policy on Ethiopia. As you said, there were very many wrong information or that were published by the State Department or spoken by the Mr. Blinken, but from the presence of the ambassador, from even the ambassador showing up to be interviewed on our station, also from what is going on in the battlefields, the balance of power being changed, I believe the government of the United States is moving in the right direction. Also, many Ethiopians argue the information gap has been filled by the work of the diaspora Ethiopians, by reaching out to their congressmen, to their senators, by the demonstrations, by our relationship with the American people. And we should encourage the gradual shift towards Ethiopia as opposed to dwell on the wrong pronouncements that have been made over the last year. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would take a slightly different approach, sir. As I say, I believe it was yesterday that the United States government said they're going to bring up to the United Nations an arms embargo against the government of Ethiopia, because the arms embargo would have no effect on TPLF. So if they're making a big change, it's not very evident to me because that statement came out yesterday. The other thing is that I would not be fooled into letting down your guard in terms of what the long-term plans are, because I believe that there's a geopolitical faction that does not want to have the duly elected Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, to be the ruler of your country. They want other people who are more malleable to their policies and they feel more comfortable in working with. And therefore, even though the victories in the battlefield are certainly encouraging and slight statements here and there, I wouldn't take them as a change in policy. For example, there are some people on behalf of the State Department, U.S. State Department, who are trying to introduce an amendment into the National Defense Act of the United States that would discuss actions against Ethiopia for committing genocide. If the United States continues to use the word genocide and ethnic cleansing, then they're on a continued path opposite to the development of Ethiopia. Because what you could see in the weeks and months ahead, especially as the military makes some successes on the battlefield, is they will potentially use a, quote, humanitarian crisis that is so big and so dangerous that the world has to intervene to save the people of Ethiopia from its own government. And that's called the responsibility to protect. And they would use that, they would use a humanitarian crisis as a pretext for some kind of intervention. Or they would use some other means to try to possibly create a transition government. There are various scenarios that I've read, they're all public, about how to weaken this government and how to remove the prime minister. And I don't believe that this geopolitical faction has changed its mind as much as your devil advocacy indicates.
With respect, Mr. Freeman, first of all, I did not see the arms embargo from the U.S. government. In the House hearing, the question of arms embargo was raised by Ilhan Omar. But maybe I am behind the information, but I haven't seen the U.S. government announcing or trying to push arms embargo in the United Nations. You may be right. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But I also want to bring to your attention that the Assistant Secretary for Africa refrained from saying there was genocide. What she said was, at the moment, we will refrain from determining our conclusion to give space for negotiation. The other one is in the interview I did with Ambassador Feltman. Ambassador Feltman, multiple times, he complimented, he acknowledged Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was elected. He even said he's a visionary leader. So I believe, I know it's not the most popular thing in Ethiopia today, but the relationship between Ethiopia and America is very important for Ethiopia, America, but also for the Horn of Africa. So I would argue we should look at the bright side. The glass is half full, and work with the government to improve or to change its policies rather than push them back. I'm sorry. What do you think?
Well, I certainly agree with you 100% that the relationship between the United States and Ethiopia is extremely important for Africa, because Ethiopia, prior to this destabilization, was the most stable nation in the Horn of Africa. It provided, over Republican and Democratic administrations, intelligence on the rebel groups in Somalia and elsewhere in East Africa. It also provided a military component to help the United States. It's a very important relationship. It should be maintained. We have to build on it. However, from my knowledge of how this geopolitical faction operates, I don't think they've changed their mind as much as you do. And I think, from my standpoint, I would continue, and I will continue as an independent person, to display and expose what I think are the intentional policies of a faction in my country in an effort to make sure they don't happen. Because if we see support continue for a ethnic terrorist group, then that could unleash a Pandora's box across the whole of Africa, where, as you know, there are hundreds of ethnic groups. And if they see the success in this group, in this effort, then that could encourage them. I'm very concerned that the United States government is very reluctant to realize that there's a difference between a nation, the nation state of Ethiopia, and a ethnic insurrectionist terrorist group. If the fact that they will not make that distinction is very troubling for me, because that's a profound distinction. The other thing is, I saw Feldman's comments last night, but no one in the State Department missed it. Certainly not Anthony Blinken or Ned Price have ever issued a statement recognizing legitimacy of the elections in June and September. I've never seen it.
No.
Maybe I missed it.
Mr. Freeman, I think they did. I know Secretary Blinken has stated, I believe in Kenya or in Ghana, when he was visiting, he did say the Prime Minister is the duly elected. I believe it is in the press conference with the Kenyan Ministry of State, if I remember right. He did acknowledge Prime Minister. Huh?
I didn't see it, but did he compliment the Prime Minister on winning the election? Okay, I didn't see that.
He did recognize the Prime Minister is elected. Compliment, I don't know. I agree with you. They should have called and congratulated the Prime Minister Abiy. But however, it may be late, but the State Department has recognized Prime Minister Abiy as the elected leader. So I want to move on to a very important point you raised. and I also raised in the interview with Ambassador Feltman, the issue of ethnic federalism. Many Ethiopians believe the root cause of the problem in Ethiopia is ethnic federalism. And unless we deal with it, it will be a problem for all African countries. The State Department and the Western governments, the EU and Great Britain, have helped TPLF constitutionalize ethnic federalism over the last 30 years. For the regular American, can you please give a brief summary of what ethnic federalism is, and if you have thought about it, what America would look like if it was an ethnic federal country?
Of course, this to me is very clear. I spent many, many years, decades in Nigeria, and I know the history of the country, and the question of ethnicity still is a very significant problem in Nigeria today, over 30 years, more than 30, 50 years after the Biafra War. Ethnicity is still troubling the country. Because the problem you have is a compromise was made in 1994, 1995, when the new constitution of Ethiopia was written. And it did not identify a single concept of an Ethiopian citizen. It talked about the national parties, the national peoples. It made a plural instead of a singular, that there is such a thing as a citizen. But to compromise and appease the various groups who contributed to the overthrow of the Derg regime in 1991, they divided up the country and they made each region where a region was represented by its dominant ethnicity. So we see that 9 regions then, now 1 more was added last year. This weakens the government, and this weakens the concept of the nation state. And we did have this problem in the United States, where in the early 1820s, there was a movement called the Nullifier Movement, which said that they don't have to listen to the federal government. And that movement contributed to the actual Civil War, which was a war to maintain the Union, to retain the Republic. And Lincoln was prepared to do whatever was necessary to save the Republic. And 750,000 Americans died in a 4-year Civil War. So the Constitution codified a series of problems that already existed in Ethiopia. And that's going to have to be changed, because you want people to represent your country based on their best policy for the future of your country, not on where they came from. We don't dismiss cultures and languages. We love them more. That it enriches the country. But it's not a basis of who should be running the country. And one group should not be dominating because they have political control. The question is, do we have the citizens of Ethiopia sitting down among themselves discussing what is best for our country, not which ethnic group is in the country? And I'm convinced that as soon as we solve this war, bring it to an end, this is going to have to be a robust debate in your country. This question, there's a difference between being a citizen of a sovereign nation and being a member of an ethnicity. They're not equal. And we have to rewrite parts of the Constitution to reaffirm the primacy of a citizen of a nation as more important than the idea of what group you came from or where you came from or what piece of land you came from.
No, I agree. I actually, if I remember right, there were 3 constitutional amendments that resulted from the Civil War. One of them was about citizenship. Not only Black Americans, but any citizen born in the United States had equal rights to everything. Of course, in Ethiopia, as we know, as you aptly put it, citizenship has no definition and was never mentioned in the TPLF constitution. I'm going to move on. One of the things I want to ask you is the role of the media, the Western media. I believe because the Western media source is former Ethiopian officials, which happen to be 100% TPLF, and also Western officials that were sort of inculcated by the TPLF ideology. The Western media has been reporting falsehoods, as I said, including New York Times. But also, I will say 99% of the Western media reporters are Caucasians from Europe, primarily from Great Britain and Ireland. And many with very little knowledge of Ethiopia, Ethiopian politics, Ethiopian culture, they come overnight and they become experts. And they report on what they are told by one faction without checking whether the story is true or not. Why do Western media insist on hiring Caucasians that have no experience on Ethiopia or Africa? Why not hire Africans or Ethiopians? There are hundreds of thousands of Ethiopian Americans who speak English, who can write well. Why always Irish or English? Why?
Well, I think you have to start from the standpoint that the media are not honest brokers in this situation. I have studied the media since I was in college, and I was very active politically then, and now that was 50 years ago. The media are not truth seekers. The media are part of the operation against Ethiopia, and they do it against other countries. It's not just Ethiopia. There's all kinds of attacks go on. They play a role as part of this geopolitical oligarchy to carry out campaigns. They carry out campaigns against leaders. They've done it throughout not just Africa, but they've done it through Africa. I've seen some of the things they write about my friend President Buhari and others. So you can't look at them and say, oh, we're trying to find the most honest people who will report honestly about what's going on. For example, Addis. Any honest reporter who steps outside the embassy or gets off the plane will see there's no hysteria in Addis. There's no reason for this red alert, don't travel here, which I had to ignore. There's no reason to whip people up that there will not be an Afghanistan lift unless you leave now and take a commercial flight. Why are they saying that? Walk on the streets of Addis. So they're deliberately I would say disinforming. And that's the point I think that it's important to understand. The media are part of the problem. Now, the other question you mentioned is serious, and it's not just in the media. We have it in the CIA, Defense Department, the Congress. As the generations go on, we have less and less experts who actually study the history and culture of a country. Some of the old hands do, people in my age bracket in their 70s, I know most of them. But as we go on, the younger people don't have a commitment to understand a country or a region that they're assigned to work in by the government or by the media. For example, if you don't study the Battle of Adwa, the 1896 victory against the Italian imperialists, you'll never understand anything about Ethiopia. You have to understand the psychology of the victory by Menelik II. Now that doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you a certain aspect of the mindset of Ethiopia. You have to look at other things that Ethiopia does that show you the mindset of how Ethiopia thinks and acts. And nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, the reporters, the congressmen, the specialists in our region and our government, they don't do the work to make this an understanding. And it gets worse year after year. And that's part of the problem we're having.
So I want to ask you. A different question now. So look forward. What do you see for Ethiopia, and also the relationship between Ethiopia and the United States? I want to note one thing. As many people know, as you know, you live in the Maryland area. There are hundreds, thousands of Ethiopians in America, in DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. We are, we own businesses, we are professionals, we are doctors, we are integrated in the community, we own property, we vote. As you know, America has been very, very welcoming to us. Our kids are advancing in industry, in government, they go to Ivy League schools. So America is dear to us, as is Ethiopia.
Yes.
our objective is to facilitate discussion to bring the two countries together. As you said, we accept Prime Minister Abiy as a duly elected Prime Minister. We also voted for the Democrats in the past election. That may change. So our role is to bring our two governments together, our two countries together. With that in mind, would you see, talk about the future, about Ethiopia and how we can improve relationship between the United States and Ethiopia?
Well, first of all, I start from a unique standpoint, which is that I believe all human beings are created in the image of the Creator with the power of creativity, or sometimes called creative mentation. This is our unique capability as human beings. Then we we organize ourselves into nations with particular languages and particular cultures. But what is the interest of every nation? The interest of every nation is actually the same. It may take different forms. It's actually beautifully articulated in the preamble to the US Constitution, which I think is the key to the whole Constitution, that the government is obligated to provide for the general welfare of its citizens and their posterity, their children. So the government has to provide for current and future generations. That is what every government should do. Therefore, since we all are human beings and we're composed and organized around nations, the nations have the same idea. How do we improve the quality of life, the material standard of living of life, and how do we nurture the creativity of the human beings that make up our society? And how do we continue that uninterrupted from one generation to the next generation to the next generation? That requires a nation to do that. Now, the interest of the Ethiopians is the same as the interest of the United States, even though the United States doesn't think the way I do, which is the development of its people. We get past this conflict, and Ethiopia has to resume its leadership in economic growth, such as, for example, producing electricity, which the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, producing 6,200 megawatts of power, will be the biggest input of electricity on the continent, in a continent that is starved from electricity. The lack of electricity is killing Africans every day. So Ethiopia should resume its role as a leader in economic growth, particularly infrastructure, which I'm a sort of a specialist in infrastructure. And Ethiopia can help the rest of Africa understand how to move forward in these economic policies. Ethiopia also is going to have to launch a massive reconstruction program for what was done because Tigray has been weakened, Afar, Amara, etc. And if the Western governments want to help, they could help in this reconstruction process. Now, what is the United States and Africa? The United States has a self-interest in developing nations in Africa, not telling them what to do, not imposing their democracy and their way of life, but helping to empower African nations to raise the standard of living of their people, which is very low and unacceptable. And one of the slogan may not be a good word, one of the aspirations of the Ethiopian leadership is to eliminate poverty. An Ethiopian leader once told me, we don't want to manage poverty, we want to eradicate it. And that's become my slogan, by the way. We want to eradicate poverty, we want to eradicate hunger. So we need a massive infrastructure program across the continent, and we need to have people have the quality of material standard of living so they can become leaders of their country. If you want your children to be leaders, then you have to give them a home which has electricity 24/7 and has separate bedrooms for each child, and they can know they're going to get 3 meals a day. And they're going to be able to develop their minds so they become your future leaders. And the interest of the United States should be to help facilitate that process of economic growth on the African continent. China is doing this in a very useful way. The geopolitical idiots, who are the same people responsible for the attacks in Ethiopia, are attacking China regularly. This is very foolish. I've written about this. China and the United States, the two largest economies in the world, could say, we are going to work together. We're going to sign a memorandum of understanding to develop the economies of Africa, to provide the 3 billion vaccines that are necessary, to help build the hospitals and manufacturing plants. We could have there's a common interest of every human being and of every nation for a better future. That's in all of our interests. It's in the interest of humanity. And therefore, there is no inherent objective reason for Ethiopia and the United States not to be friends, not to be allies, but to work together. However, we have a grouping that opposes that. And it's my job as an American who understands America very, very well and understands Ethiopia and Africa, my job is to make sure those people who are in the way of creating a positive relationship between Ethiopia and America are not successful. I have to stop any efforts at regime change or any attempts to undermine the nation state of Ethiopia. That's my job as an American, and I accept it.
Yeah, I thank you. I think I will just say I do not believe the United States government wants regime change. The U.S. policy towards Ethiopia has been wrong for a year. But again, as I said, most Ethiopian Americans like me, we want to re-establish our relationship, and I think we will do that. I think at last, I want to ask you a couple of easy questions. So, how did you get involved in Ethiopia and Africa? Briefly, please.
I have a very unusual background. My parents brought me up with a strong social conscience. And when I was a teenager, so that's over a half century ago, I was thinking about Africa. I became very active in the politics of the 60s and so forth. And it was 30 years ago, I returned to studying Africa and seeing what I could do to change the situation. I began writing and speaking. I recruited originally some Cameroonians and Nigerians and spread to Sudan. And I began to think about Ethiopia. I would say my involvement started about 12 years ago. And as each time I go to Ethiopia and I teach classes on history, I improve my own understanding of Africa, I've become more and more committed over the last 5 to 10 years to the development of Africa. I am a follower of Alexander Hamilton, the great economic genius of my country, and I want to apply Hamilton's policies to developing in Africa. And I think Ethiopia is maybe the closest country to understanding how those policies can work in terms of economic growth. And now, in my later years of life, outside of hiking, Africa is my passion.
Mr. Freeman, I greatly thank you, and I want to express our gratitude, Ethiopians' gratitude, that you not only stood by Ethiopia, but you went all the way to Addis to be with the Ethiopian people. Thank you, and hopefully we will see you on another program. And when you come back, hopefully we can go to lunch or dinner and enjoy Ethiopian food. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to having dinner with you in traditional Ethiopian food.
Okay. Thank you. This has been our program. Before I conclude, I want to announce it has been always our policy. We welcome all the United States government or think tanks or intellectuals who want to participate in bringing Ethiopia and the United States closer together. So our doors are open. In the past, we have tried to invite people from the Atlantic Council, from CEIS. Unfortunately, we haven't been successful. So we believe Ethiopian policy formulation should include Ethiopians and Ethiopian Americans. At least we should be listened to. So with that in mind, we encourage debate. And our forum is open for all who agree with us or who disagree with us. That has been our program for today. This is Insight from Washington, D.C. studios of ESAT. Until next time, bye.